The airport supervisor laughed at an old veteran because of his worn-out jacket. 7 minutes later, she was begging him to forgive her. Most people believe respect is earned through wealth, power, or appearance. But one airport supervisor learned that the person standing quietly in old clothes may be the one who deserves your respect the most. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Terminal B was overflowing with travelers. Families rushed toward security. Business travelers stared at their phones. Flight announcements echoed through the building. Among the crowd, an elderly man slowly entered through the main doors. He looked to be nearly 80 years old. His gray military jacket had clearly seen better days. His duffel bag was old, its corners faded from decades of use. His shoes were clean, but badly worn. His name was Robert Hayes. He wasn't asking for money. He wasn't looking for sympathy. He simply needed help finding his departure gate. Robert walked carefully toward the information counter. Behind it stood Airport Operations Supervisor Sandra Mitchell. Sandra was known throughout the terminal. She believed strict authority kept everything under control. Unfortunately, she also believed appearances revealed everything about a person. Without even looking up, she said, "Next." Robert smiled politely. "Good morning, ma'am. I think I may be looking at the wrong terminal. Could you help me find Gate 27? Sandra finally looked up. Her eyes moved from his jacket to his old duffel bag, then to his weathered boots. Her expression immediately changed. "Sir, passengers aren't allowed to wander around restricted areas." Robert looked confused. "I'm sorry. I thought this was the information desk." "It is," Sandra replied sharply, "but we're here to help travelers. Not people who walk in off the street." Several nearby passengers turned their heads. Robert remained calm. "I am traveling today. I just need help finding my gate." Sandra folded her arms. "Do you even have a boarding pass?" Robert reached into his jacket pocket. Before he could pull it out, Sandra interrupted him. "You know what? Never mind. If you're confused, airport security can deal with you." A young mother standing nearby frowned. The elderly man hadn't raised his voice once. He had only asked a simple question. Robert tried again. "Ma'am, I promise I'm not causing any trouble. My eyesight isn't what it used to be. I just need directions." Sandra sighed dramatically, then looked around at the growing line behind him. "You're holding everyone up." People began watching. Some looked uncomfortable. Others quietly listened without saying a word. Robert lowered his voice. "I apologize. I'll only take a moment." Sandra stepped out from behind the counter. "If you're not leaving, I'll make you leave." She grabbed the old duffel bag from Robert's shoulder. He instinctively reached toward it. "Please, be careful with that." Sandra ignored him. She tossed the bag onto the polished airport floor. Its zipper burst open. Everything spilled across the terminal. A folded American flag, several military medals, a framed photograph, travel documents, prescription medicine. The terminal suddenly became silent. Robert slowly knelt to gather his belongings. A little boy broke away from his father. He picked up one of the medals. "Mister, you dropped this." Robert smiled warmly. "Thank you, young man." Before the boy could hand it back, Sandra snapped, "Leave his things alone." The father quickly called his son back. Several passengers now pulled out their phones. Some quietly started recording. Robert carefully brushed the dust from the folded flag, then looked at Sandra. His voice remained calm. "Ma'am, I served this country for 31 years. I've never spoken to anyone the way you've spoken to me." Sandra laughed. "Congratulations. That doesn't give you permission to disrupt my terminal." Robert stood up slowly, then said something almost no one expected. "I hope You never have to learn respect the hard way. Sandra crossed her arms. Are you threatening me? Robert calmly shook his head. No, I'm asking you to treat people with dignity. Sandra gave a sarcastic laugh. I don't have time for lectures. She looked toward a nearby security checkpoint. Officer! 2 airport security officers hurried over. One was young. The other looked to be in his 60s. Sandra pointed directly at Robert. This man has been causing a disturbance. I want him removed from the terminal. The older officer looked around. Passengers were standing quietly. No one looked frightened. No one looked threatened. He turned to Robert. Sir, did something happen? Robert answered honestly. I asked for directions. That's all. The officer looked at the scattered belongings on the floor, then back at Sandra. Ma'am, are you sure? Sandra's voice became sharper. I don't pay you to question my decisions. I gave you an order. The older officer hesitated, then quietly helped Robert collect the last few items. I'm sorry, sir. I'll walk you outside. Robert nodded. I understand. He carefully folded the American flag, placed the medals back into his duffel bag, and thanked the officer. Not once did he raise his voice. Not once did he insult Sandra. As they walked toward the exit, people stepped aside. Several passengers lowered their heads. A young woman quietly whispered, This is awful. An older couple stopped walking altogether. The husband pulled out his phone. So nobody can deny what happened. Within minutes, more than a dozen people had recorded the entire confrontation. Outside the terminal, rain was falling steadily. The older security officer stopped beside Robert. I'm truly sorry. You didn't deserve any of this. Robert smiled gently. I know. You treated me with respect. That's all anyone can ask. The officer nodded. Watching Robert stand alone in the rain felt wrong. Very wrong. Back inside. Sandra dusted off her hands. She looked around the terminal, then announced loudly, All right, everyone. The situation has been handled. Let's get back to normal. Nobody answered. The silence was heavier than before. Some passengers stared at her. Others simply walked away. Even airport employees avoided eye contact. Sandra noticed, but ignored it. Then, the sound of several engines echoed outside the terminal. One black SUV stopped at the entrance, then another, then a third. Within seconds, 5 identical black SUVs were parked outside the airport. Airport employees immediately looked toward the glass doors. Sandra smiled confidently. The regional executives. They weren't supposed to arrive until this afternoon. She quickly straightened her blazer, checked her reflection in the glass, then smiled to herself. Perfect timing. She had no idea. They weren't there to inspect the terminal. They were there for the elderly veteran she had just thrown out. Robert quietly zipped his duffel bag. He thanked the older security officer and slowly walked toward the airport exit. The rain outside had become heavier. Within the terminal, nobody spoke. Sandra looked around. She forced a confident smile. Everything is under control. Let's move on. No one responded. Several passengers simply stared at her. Others shook their heads before walking away. The young mother who had witnessed everything quietly said, I hope nobody ever treats my father like that. Sandra pretended not to hear. She walked back behind the information counter, straightened a few papers, and acted as though nothing had happened. Then, the sound of multiple engines echoed outside the terminal. One black luxury SUV stopped at the entrance, then another, then another. Within seconds, 5 identical black SUVs lined up outside the terminal. Airport employees immediately looked toward the entrance. Sandra smiled. The regional executive team. They're here early. She quickly adjusted her blazer, smoothed her hair, and confidently walked toward the entrance. The terminal manager hurried over. I didn't know they were visiting today. Sandra smiled proudly. They'll probably be inspecting customer service. I'm sure everything will be fine. Outside, Robert stood quietly beneath the entrance canopy. He wasn't angry. He wasn't complaining. He simply waited for the rain to ease before walking to the parking lot. The older security officer remained nearby. He couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. The first SUV door opened. A sharply dressed executive stepped out. Then another, then 4 more. Sandra immediately walked toward them with a bright smile. Good afternoon. Welcome to Terminal B. It's an honor to have you here. The lead executive barely acknowledged her. Instead, he looked past Sandra, directly toward Robert. His expression changed instantly. He began walking quickly across the sidewalk. The other executives followed without hesitation. Sandra frowned. She turned around, confused. Why weren't they coming toward her? Why were they walking toward the elderly veteran she had just thrown out? Passengers near the entrance noticed it too. Several people stopped walking. Even airport employees stepped outside to watch. The lead executive stopped in front of Robert. Then, to everyone's surprise, he extended both hands with genuine respect. Mr. Hayes, I sincerely apologize for making you wait. Sandra's confident smile disappeared. For the first time that day, she looked nervous. Sandra stood frozen. The lead executive smiled warmly at Robert. Mr. Hayes, we've been expecting you. I'm David Reynolds, Regional Director of Airport Operations. I'm truly sorry for what happened. Robert shook his hand. It's not your apology to make. David looked toward Sandra. His expression immediately became serious. What happened here? Before Sandra could answer, a young mother stepped forward. I saw everything. Another passenger raised his phone. I recorded the whole incident. Then another voice spoke. So did I. Within seconds, 4 different passengers held up their phones. The older security officer quietly stepped forward. I witnessed everything. The gentleman asked for directions. He never argued. He never raised his voice. David turned toward Sandra. Is that true? Sandra's confidence disappeared. I believed he didn't belong here. David interrupted her. You believed? Because of his appearance. Sandra lowered her head. David looked back at Robert, then addressed everyone standing nearby. This is Colonel Robert Hayes, a retired veteran. He served this country for more than 30 years. He also spent the last decade volunteering with our airport's Veterans Travel Assistance Program, helping hundreds of retired service members travel safely across the country. Several employees gasped. Sandra looked completely stunned. She quietly walked toward Robert. Her voice trembled. Colonel Hayes, I'm so sorry. I made a terrible mistake. Robert looked at her calmly. No, you made a choice. You decided who I was before you ever spoke to me. Nobody in the terminal said a word. David turned toward airport management. I want security footage from every camera covering this terminal. I also want every complaint filed against Supervisor Mitchell during the past 3 years. 3 days later, the investigation was complete. Security footage, passenger videos, and employee statements all told the same story. This wasn't an isolated incident. Sandra had repeatedly spoken down to elderly travelers, mocked people because of their appearance, and ignored multiple complaints from passengers. Airport management reached its decision. Sandra Mitchell was dismissed from her position, not because Colonel Hayes was important, but because she had forgotten the first responsibility of public service: treat every person with dignity. The older security officer received a commendation for professionalism. Several passengers received letters thanking them for speaking up. As for Robert, he returned to the airport the following month, not as a guest of honor, not for recognition, but to help another group of elderly veterans board their flights. One new airport employee recognized him. "Sir, after everything that happened, why did you come back?" Robert smiled. "Because one person's disrespect should never stop another person's kindness." He picked up his old duffel bag, helped an elderly veteran with his luggage, then quietly walked toward the departure gate. Some people spend their lives trying to prove they're important. Others prove it by how they treat people who can do nothing for them. Because respect is never earned by a title, it's revealed by character, and character is something everyone notices when nobody thinks they're being watched.